The morning of the reading, Marianne wore black, not out of mourning, but calculation. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a pompous slowness, as if it too waited to pass judgment. Around her, leather-bound law books lined the cherrywood shelves of her father's favorite room, his private study that now served as a stage for his final decision. She sat upright, hands folded tightly in her lap, the way he used to scold her for not doing at dinner. Across from her, her younger brother Jeremy leaned back carelessly in the antique wingback, leg crossed, wearing a crisp suit and a smug smile, the same smile he wore at the funeral last week. "You look tense," Jeremy said, voice syrupy. "Dad always said you worried too much." Marianne gave a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you never worried enough." The door creaked open and Mr. Thorne, the family attorney, shuffled in. His gray hair and deeper wrinkles made him look like he'd aged 20 years since their father's passing. He adjusted his glasses, holding a thick tan envelope like it might burn his fingers. "Thank you both for coming," he began. "Your father's final will and testament is unconventional." Marianne's pulse quickened. Jeremy only smirked wider. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat and read aloud. "To my son Jeremy, I leave the estate at Willow Point, including all its contents, the boat, and the investment accounts. To my daughter Marianne, I leave the portrait of her grandmother hanging in the foyer and my sincere hope she finds peace." A silence fell like a tombstone. Marianne sat frozen, like she hadn't heard right. The portrait? A dusty oil painting of Grandma Clara that everyone avoided because her eyes followed you down the hall? Her voice cracked. "That's it?" Mr. Thorne avoided her gaze. I tried to counsel him otherwise, but he was firm in his decision. It's legally binding." Jeremy let out a soft chuckle. "Guess that's what happens when you're always the one making trouble, sis." Her nails dug into her palms. She thought of the last conversation she'd had with her father, a week before his stroke. It was civil, cold, cordial. They talked about taxes and weather, not love, not closure, certainly not betrayal. Marianne stood. "I'd like to see the painting." Mr. Thorne nodded, a bit too quickly. "Of course." She walked out in a trance. Her heels clicked across the old parquet floor toward the foyer. The painting loomed above the staircase, where it always had. Grandma Clara in a lace dress, pearl earrings, and that unreadable expression. But now, Marianne noticed something new. The edge of the frame was slightly ajar. Her fingers reached for it and click. A hidden hinge. The portrait swung forward, revealing a recessed compartment in the wall. Inside was a weathered envelope, sealed with a wax crest. Her father's handwriting scrawled across it. "To Marianne, if they've taken everything, take this." Her breath caught. Hands trembling, she pulled the envelope out and turned back toward the study. Marianne's fingers were slick with sweat by the time she sat back down in the study, the sealed envelope clutched tightly in her lap. Jeremy raised an eyebrow at the sight of it. "What's that?" he asked, voice still colored with lazy arrogance. "Something Dad left in the painting," she said carefully, watching his smirk falter. Mr. Thorne leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "May I see that?" Marianne hesitated. The wax seal looked ancient, stamped with their family crest, an oak tree and a banner that read Virtus in Veritate, strength in truth. Her father had it engraved on his cufflinks. "No," she said finally. "Not yet." She stood, clutching the letter like a live wire, and turned toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Jeremy called, but she didn't answer. She needed space. She needed silence. She needed to know if the letter changed anything, if it proved her father wasn't the cold man that letter just read him to be. She didn't open it until she was in her car, parked in the lot of the old library 2 towns over. The same place she used to escape to in high school when her father's voice thundered too loudly down the hallways. With shaky hands, she broke the seal. The letter was handwritten in her father's unmistakable script, angular, precise, almost military. The first line shattered her composure. "Marianne, if you're reading this, it means Jeremy got what he wanted." She gripped the steering wheel. He's manipulated the family for years, but I didn't see the full extent until it was too late. I tried to undo things, but he threatened to expose your mother's condition, something that would have cost us our business, our reputation. I made a deal to keep it quiet. I regret it every day. Tears welled up in her eyes. Their mother had struggled with an undiagnosed bipolar disorder for years, something her father always insisted was just mood swings. You were always the stronger one, the more honest, the one who reminded me of your grandmother. That's why I hid this here, because if anyone could handle the truth, it was you. There was a pause in the ink, a long one, a smudged one. Her father had hesitated here. I created a second trust, one Jeremy doesn't know about. Grandma Clara's old bakery property downtown, plus the deeds to 2 undeclared plots in Elm Harbor. They're yours. I never wanted him to have everything, I just couldn't say it aloud. She gasped. The bakery had been shut down for years, left to rot. But Elm Harbor? That was lakefront. She flipped the page and found a map with handwritten notes, coordinates, and a list of names. Lawyers, bank contacts, people she didn't recognize. One line at the bottom chilled her. He forged your signature once, watch him, he'll do it again. She dropped the letter onto the passenger seat and stared straight ahead, her heart pounding like war drums. Suddenly, the will wasn't the end. It was the opening move, and she wasn't out of the game. That evening, Marianne returned to the house. Jeremy was still there, drinking from one of their father's rare scotches like he owned the place. He looked up when she entered and gave a slow, mocking clap. Back so soon? Found a treasure map in Grandma's old bones? Marianne gave him a smile now, one that was calm, cold, exact. I found what Dad wanted me to find. Jeremy's smirk twitched. Don't worry, she added. I'm not coming for your house, I'm coming for the truth. He paused, sensing the shift in her tone. You always did love drama. And you always underestimated me, she said softly. But that's over now. She walked past him, letter still tucked in her bag. She had phone calls to make, old records to pull, and trust deeds to claim. Jeremy might have had the estate, but Marianne had the secrets. And secrets, when wielded right, had a way of burning entire legacies to the ground. 3 days passed. In that time, Marianne didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. Her days were a carousel of phone calls, bank visits, and trips to the county records office. Her fingers developed calluses from flipping dusty registry books, and her voice cracked from repeating the same request. I need to see anything under the name Clara Whitmore, and any holdings transferred by Richard Whitmore in the last 20 years. What she discovered was worse than she expected, and better. Her father had moved assets quietly, stashing properties in her grandmother's name, even keeping some deeds in old safety deposit boxes registered under LLCs no one in the family knew about. But 2 things stood out. A notarized document transferring ownership of the Elm Harbor lots to her, dated 6 months before his death. A forged reversal of that same transfer, dated only 3 weeks after his stroke, signed in her name. The handwriting looked close. Too close. But Marianne had never seen that second document, and her father had still been in the hospital, unable to speak, let alone move. She stared at the copy in the dusty legal file, her hands clenched. Jeremy. He had used her name to reclaim the deed, to funnel it back into his control, and she had proof. That night, she confronted Mr. Thorne. Why didn't you tell me about the Elm Harbor lots? The old lawyer looked cornered in his own office. I assumed you knew. Your father made the transfer quietly. Then it appeared you signed it back. I had no reason to doubt. You think I'd undo the only thing he left me, after giving everything else to Jeremy? Thorne's face fell. You're saying the signature. I never signed that form. He leaned back, eyes troubled. That's fraud. Possibly even felony level. Marianne placed both palms on his desk and leaned in. Then help me prove it. By the weekend, the investigation had begun. Mr. Thorne, clearly rattled by the idea he may have witnessed or overlooked fraud, called in a handwriting expert. Marianne provided old letters, school forms, tax returns, anything with her genuine signature. Jeremy, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Too quiet. Marianne sensed he knew the walls were closing in. His gloating text messages had stopped. His posts on social media, normally full of boozy selfies and curated status updates about family legacy, had vanished. Then, on Sunday morning, she received an email with no subject line. Just a scan. It was a photo of her father's old journal, and a post-it stuck to the page with no sender name. Ask your brother about June 14th, 2019. It wasn't just a car crash. Her blood ran cold. June 14th, 2019. The night her father had totaled his car on a bridge near Elm Harbor. The family story was that he'd swerved to avoid a deer. But Marianne always remembered the odd way Jeremy had acted afterward. Quiet, obsessed with going through their father's files. The insurance settlement had been large. Too large. She called her father's old mechanic, then the tow company, then the police department. By dusk, she had the file in her hand. The crash was not reported as a deer strike. It had been logged as unknown driver interference. Her father had been found dazed in the passenger seat. Jeremy had been driving. He hadn't just forged a signature. He had staged the crash that almost killed their father. Marianne stood alone on the Elm Harbor lots as the sun set over the lake, the papers in her hand fluttering in the breeze. The land was still hers, legally, if she could get the forged signature thrown out. But this was no longer about real estate. It was about truth. And next, she was going public. She didn't care about money anymore. She cared about bringing down the brother who stole everything and nearly buried the one man who'd finally tried to make it right. Marianne didn't flinch as the camera light blinked on. It had been 10 days since she uncovered the forged deed and the truth behind the car crash. 10 days since she stopped waiting for justice to come from courts or quiet conversations. Her voice was tired, but her eyes were steel. I'm recording this for anyone who's ever had family betray them in the name of money, she began, staring into the lens. For anyone who was made to feel like they were difficult, when really they were just telling the truth. She placed the signed deed in front of her, along with the forensic handwriting report that confirmed the signature wasn't hers. My name is Marianne Whitmore. My brother Jeremy forged my name to steal land our father gave me before he died. Then, when I started to ask questions, I learned that years ago, he caused the crash that almost killed our father, and he lied to all of us about it. She looked down, gathering herself. And he's still out there, pretending to be the golden son. The video wasn't flashy, it was just real, raw. She posted it anonymously at first, through a blog she'd used in college, back when she wrote poems no one read and confessions no one understood. But it didn't stay hidden long. Within 48 hours, the video had 22,000 views, then 80,000, then over 250,000. Local news outlets picked it up first, calling it the Elm Harbor inheritance fraud, then regional reporters. By the end of the week, a segment aired on morning television, Sibling Betrayal and a $3.2 million cover-up. That number, $3.2 million, came from the estimated market value of the 2 lakefront plots. And suddenly, Jeremy couldn't hide anymore. She saw him again at the emergency hearing. He looked thinner, paler. His lawyer tried to argue that Marianne had consented and forgotten, suggesting stress-related memory lapses. But the judge wasn't buying it. You're telling me she forgot signing a $1 million asset away 3 weeks after her father's stroke while grieving his death? The courtroom chuckled darkly. Jeremy's lawyer shrank. Marianne watched Jeremy's jaw clench tighter than steel cables. He didn't say a word, not even when the judge placed a temporary injunction on all property sales related to the estate. Not even when the clerk said the case would be forwarded to the district attorney for investigation. But afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, he found her. You think you've won? He hissed, eyes red. You don't know what you've started. She turned slowly. Her voice came out like ice. No, Jeremy. I know exactly what I started. It's the end of your story. He stepped closer. You're tearing this family apart." She didn't blink. "Number you did. I'm just letting the light in." That night, back at her small apartment, Marianne stared at a blank wall where her father's portrait now hung. She had it reframed and brought it home, not because she loved it, but because it reminded her of where the truth started. She sat down with her laptop and opened a new folder. Evidence, Elm Harbor. Dozens of documents lined up, PDFs, signed forms, audio clips from phone calls. A voicemail Jeremy accidentally left ranting about fixing the inheritance. It wasn't over, but it was shifting. Next would come depositions, maybe subpoenas, more interviews, more headlines. But Marianne had found her footing, and for the first time in years, she wasn't the quiet one who got brushed aside. She was the one holding the match. The first reporter showed up at Marianne's door 2 mornings after the hearing, young, earnest, holding a latte and a business card from a regional magazine. "Just want to get your side of the story," he said. She almost laughed. For years, no one had asked for her side of anything. By the end of the week, she'd given 3 interviews and declined 12. A journalist from a national outlet left a voicemail asking about exclusive rights. Every version of her face, tired, resolute, glassy-eyed, began appearing beside the headline. She was left with a portrait. Then she exposed the $3.2 million family secret. But Marianne didn't care about fame. She cared about facts. And truth was making Jeremy unravel. The call came at 3:42 a.m. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he said. Marianne sat up, blinking in the dark. "Then you should have stopped before forging my name." There was silence. Dad was going to cut me off. After what happened with the crash, he didn't trust me. I thought if I took control of the properties, maybe I could fix things." She scoffed. "Fix what? Your image? Your bank account?" "No," he muttered. "My place in this family." That stopped her. For one aching second, she heard the fear behind his voice, the same fear that probably haunted her too, the fear of being unloved, unworthy, disposable. But she couldn't let it soften her. "You didn't fix anything, Jeremy. You just proved Dad was right." He didn't call again. The deposition took place the following Thursday in a beige conference room that smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee. Marianne wore her grandmother's brooch, an old silver locket that hung heavy at her collarbone, and brought copies of every document she'd gathered. She watched Jeremy avoid eye contact the entire time. When his lawyer asked if she'd be willing to settle the matter quietly, Marianne didn't even flinch. "This is already louder than you ever expected," she said, "and I'm not interested in silence anymore." A month later, the court issued a ruling in her favor. The forged signature was thrown out. The deeds were restored to her name. And Jeremy, now facing a formal investigation for fraud and perjury, retreated behind high-priced attorneys and a statement that simply read, "Family matters are private. I regret any misunderstanding." Marianne released her own statement, clipped and sharp. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal. But behind the press, the rulings, and the headlines, Marianne stood quietly in front of the old bakery her grandmother had once run. It was covered in ivy now, the shutters rotted and roof sagging. But beneath the decay, she saw the bones of something stronger. There was still something worth rebuilding. She unlocked the door for the first time in decades. The inside was dusty and forgotten, but not dead. Flour still clung to the edges of the counters. An old chalkboard menu hung lopsided behind the register. On the counter was a small, brittle recipe card tucked under a rusted tray. Clara's lemon rosemary shortbread. Marianne smiled. The inheritance wasn't just land, it was legacy. It wasn't just about what Jeremy tried to steal. It was about what she'd reclaimed. 3 months later, the bakery opened again. It wasn't flashy. No grand opening banners, no influencers posing under pastel neon signs. Just a wooden plaque that read, "Clara's," hand-carved by a local craftsman, hung above the doorway. Below it, a smaller sign etched in glass. "Rooted in truth, served with grace." Marianne stood behind the counter that morning, tying her apron over a pale linen blouse. The smell of lemon zest and sugar had already begun to fill the space. She moved with quiet rhythm, just like Grandma Clara used to. When the first customer walked in, an elderly woman who remembered buying hot rolls from her grandmother 40 years ago, Marianne offered the shortbread with trembling hands. "You brought it back," the woman whispered, tears in her eyes. "No," Marianne said gently, "it never left. It was just buried." Jeremy didn't come to the bakery. Not when it made the local food column, not when the grandnieces from their mother's side dropped by, not even when their father's oldest friend, a man who once toasted Jeremy as the future of Whitmore legacy, sat at a corner table and quietly ordered 2 tins of shortbread to go. But Marianne heard whispers. He'd sold the house at Willow Point. Quietly, discreetly. There were rumors of mounting legal fees and even more aggressive investigations behind closed doors. Fraud was an ugly thing when it left a paper trail. And though the DA's office never charged him criminally, the stain never faded. His name, once bulletproof in their town, had become the closing line in too many conversations. And then, of course, there was what Jeremy Whitmore did. One fall evening, long after the last customer had left, Marianne sat alone in the shop, her hands dusted with flour and her heart full of something still, but no longer heavy. She flipped through her father's journal, the one recovered from the safety deposit box she'd opened with the extra key taped behind the painting. Near the back, she found a folded piece of paper. A letter. She hadn't seen it before. To Marianne, if you've made it this far, I hope you know the truth wasn't always something I could say out loud, but I believed in you, even when I didn't show it. Especially then. She swallowed hard, reading the final line twice. You weren't difficult, you were just unwilling to pretend. For the first time since the will reading, she wept, not out of rage, not even grief, but release. The next day, a new framed photo appeared on the bakery's back wall. It was of Grandma Clara, young and smiling in front of the shop in the 1960s, apron stained with butter, eyes laughing at something just beyond the lens. Next to it hung another photo, Marianne in the same spot, holding a tray of lemon shortbread, eyes calm and strong. Beneath them, a brass plaque read, "Legacy is not what we leave, it's what we live."